This week, Siskel and Ebert review James Spader becoming obsessed with Susan Sarandon in White Palace. Zombies walk again in a new version of Night of the Living Dead. And in Quigley Down Under, Tom Selleck is a sharpshooter in 19th century Australia. It's all coming up next on Siskel and Ebert.
Before you assume I'm guilty, weren't you hear my story?
No. Never let defendants explain. Puts most of them in an awkward position.
How do you mean?
Lying.
Jeremy Irons as Klaus von Bülow, accused of twice trying to murder his wife in Reversal of Fortune. That's one of the 4 new movies we'll be reviewing this week on Siskel and Ebert. We'll also have a report on the cult film The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is finally coming to home video after 15 years. It's popular, but is it any good? I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. Our first movie is one of the strangest and most peculiarly entertaining films of the year. It's based on the 2 court trials of Klaus von Bülow, the wealthy Newport society figure who was accused of trying to murder his wife Sonny in 1979 with an overdose of insulin. This story ought to be the stuff of tragedy, but Reversal of Fortune is a wicked black comedy, and at the center of it is an impeccable performance by Jeremy Irons as the mysterious and very strange von Bülow. In this scene, he hires the famous Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz to lead his appeal, and I think his affected manner here is designed to help conceal his very real fear of going to jail.
Well, won't you at least read the record and see if you can find something constitutional?
That's Ron Silver as the attorney. Although the real Sonny von Bülow is still in a coma, the movie is narrated by her character, played by Glenn Close. In this scene, she remembers the beginning of her affair with Klaus.
I never liked people much, not as a rule. But Klaus was somehow different. Not a normal person, I guess.
Sonny was a beautiful and popular woman, but she had a problem with drugs and alcohol.
We'll see if that ugly little maid of mine can sniff this one out.
What did happen on the day Sonny slipped into an irreversible coma? The movie remains ambiguous.
Mrs. von Bülow.
Leave her alone. She's sleeping. She was drinking last night. We didn't get any rest.
She's not sleeping. She's unconscious.
Here's one of the key moments of the movie, showing a Klaus von Bülow who may be innocent or may be guilty, but who apparently enjoys tantalizing people with the possibility of his guilt.
You know, it's very hard to trust someone you don't understand. You're a very strange man.
You have no idea.
And that's a nice moment. Reversal of Fortune is one of the most stimulating, entertaining, and funny movies I've seen this year. It's a comedy, even though it's about a tragedy. The genius of the movie, I think, is that it's narrated by the Sonny von Bülow character. So even though she's in a coma, in a sense, she's there beside us looking at these events and trying, like everyone else, to decide what's true and what's fiction. What happened on that last day of her conscious life? In the movie, she says, "You tell me," and that gives us permission to be intrigued and fascinated by this notorious chapter in the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
I think it's a very good film, and I think Jeremy Irons, does this role as well as you could expect. He is familiar enough with what we think we know about Klaus von Bülow, and yet fresh in the performances. It's very exciting. I think the great decision is to make the story focus not on the relationship between von Bülow and his wife, which I think would be the standard way, and making it simply as a puzzle. I think that the focus is on Dershowitz, the lawyer, and von Bülow, these 2 very strong personalities who have special gifts. One for, I guess, coming off as a mysterious guy in some way. I mean, and the other who's extremely clever. And I enjoyed these two different worlds.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dershowitz lawyer runs like a hippie commune for his Harvard law students, and they're fascinating too.
It's really an interesting movie in many different ways. It was directed by Barbet Schroeder, who is a Swiss director whose last film was Barfly, a movie that I like better than you did. But I think that one thing that's in common between those two movies, the Mickey Rourke performance in Barfly, the Jeremy Irons performance here, is Schroeder is not afraid to let his actors go a little bit over the top, to go a little bit outside the bounds of conventional realism in order to give us somebody who's genuinely original and weird. And that's what happens here.
And I also like the fact that the movie leaves it up to me to think about whether this guy is guilty or not.
Yeah.
And what did you think?
What did I think?
Yeah.
I think that he let something happen, but he didn't make it happen. And
if you believe that that's not a contradiction on its face, what you just said.
Well, but you know what I mean.
I know, and I
what
agree
do you
with
think, then?
I agree with you, except that I think that the letting was willful and so culpable.
Okay, so 10 more people and we have a jury.
Right. Next film, and our next film is Quigley Down Under. I think this film is clearly guilty, with Tom Selleck playing an American sharpshooter in Australia in the 1860s who winds up defending the local Aborigine population against a cruel landowner. The film would also like to be an old-fashioned Western romance with petite Laura San Giacomo in the Spitfire role. Selleck, upon arrival, gets into a fight protecting her.
Stay out of this!
Sorry, Roy.
My name ain't Roy, it's Matthew Quigley.
You? And you're the fella Marston sent us to bring back.
Eventually, Mr. Quigley is brought to the ranch of the evil Alan Rickman. Remember him as the villain in the original Die Hard? Well, he's good here, too, as Selleck demonstrates his long-range marksmanship.
Are you quite certain, Mr. Quigley, that you wouldn't like the bucket a bit closer?
It turns out that Rickman wants Selleck to kill Aborigines in order to claim their land, and when Selleck resists, well, Rickman's thugs here deposit him and Laura San Giacomo in the middle of the Australian outback. The scene is eventually played for would-be laughs.
I wish people quit hitting me on the head.
Don't worry. On a new job, it's quite common for things not to go well at first.
I found Quigley Down Under to be a big mess. Selleck seems stiff and looks silly in his goatee, which looks like it's pasted on. The only thing that is distinctive about his relationship with San Giacomo is how much taller he is than she. She comes up to about his chest. The movie tackles a serious subject, the murder of Aborigines, in one scene, but laughs it away in the next. Quigley Down Under, I think, is a perfect example of why a lot of people are no longer interested in the Western movie.
Well, I'm not going to recommend it either, but I guess I must have liked it a whole lot more than you did. This is one of those movies that falls into the category of having greater psychic pleasures than intellectual pleasures. I think that intellectually it's a pretty dim-witted movie.
Right.
But in terms of the pleasures that you get while you're watching it, there were a lot of them. I liked Selleck in this movie. I thought he was very convincing as the cowboy. The goatee is obviously real, Gene. I think you're just unused to seeing it on his chin. As for the difference in height between the two characters, I don't see where that's relevant at all. I feel that they had a real interesting chemistry, so interesting that I wish there had been more screen time devoted to it. And she, in particular, is a real strong presence here. She is one of those Spitfire types from the old Westerns of the old days.
She is playing one, clearly, but I think she's such a modern person that in this clothing, and him, again, a modern guy in that clothing, I didn't buy them as characters at all. And all I'm making the point about his goatee, of course it's natural. I mean, I don't think he had to have it pasted on. I'm saying it looks pasted on. And maybe that's because the whole character looks pasted on. The uniform, the whole story. I saw two modern young performers walking through a vintage story.
Well, I was able to suspend my disbelief, I guess, a little more successfully than you. It's been 22 years since the original Night of the Living Dead became a landmark in horror film history. Now the movie is back as a remake. We'll review it later in the program, and coming up next is White Palace, the unlikely love story between Susan Sarandon and James Spader.
I have never wanted a woman as much as I wanted you. 50 burgers, you gave me 44. Now what's the problem? Do I get my money back or do I go to the manager?
That's James Spader as a young yuppie in the advertising business, and Susan Sarandon as a waitress there in a hamburger joint. And White Palace tells the story of how they fall into a passionate love affair even though they come from different age groups, different backgrounds, and different religious traditions. He's Jewish, she is a former Catholic. In the movie, they meet accidentally later that same night at a bar, and he's been celibate ever since the death of his wife 2 years ago, but that night they get drunk, they make love, and even though he says he'll never see her again, he's back at her door in no time.
I'm 43. I'll be 44 in December.
I'm 27.
Eventually, the affair turns into not only love, but obsession. And yet the Spader character is reluctant to introduce this older, working-class woman to his friends or family.
Nora, I don't know what's happening.
Why did you lie to me?
I don't know what's happening to me. I have never wanted a woman as much as I wanted you. Never, not even my wife.
You better be careful with words like that. Words like that could kill a person if you don't mean it.
Well, I mean it.
That you love me more than you do your wife?
I didn't say that. I said I wanted you more than my wife.
What's the difference?
Spader finally does bring Sarandon to a Thanksgiving dinner for family and friends, but it doesn't turn out very well.
Dad, come on.
We're talking about people, folks, who are unmitigated tragedies for the working class.
Mister, I am working class. What the hell do you know about it anyway? It doesn't look to me like you've been missing too many meals.
White Palace is being billed as sort of the autumn version of Pretty Woman, but this isn't a Cinderella story. It's an honest and occasionally funny study of an inappropriate romance. These two people are strongly drawn to one another, they're obsessed by one another, and yet the man is constantly under pressure from his peer group and his family to settle down with the right woman, by which everyone means a Jewish girl of about the same age, education, and class background. The tug-of-war is mostly within his own mind and involves a battle between his desire to conform and the fact that this woman touches him as no other woman ever has. It's interesting as an examination of that theme.
Well, I don't know how interesting it is. I mean, the theme is fascinating, of course, and fairly common, but regardless of religion or any kind of class. For me, I had a couple of reactions. One, I thought they were both very good in, I think, really cartoon kind of roles. I think that the actors make the film worth watching for whatever value it has. At the same time, the stereotypes are so broad and I think cruel, particularly on the Jewish women in the film. At one point, he swears at his mother and she just takes it. I mean, that's highly unlikely. Every single woman, his former wife is put down. The wife of his best friend is complete materialistic nerd. All the characters we saw at the Thanksgiving dinner, there's no humanity there. I would have thought that there would have been something other than good sex. It's the only thing that Sarandon is really offering him, just good sex.
I think I saw more humanity than you did. First of all, I think that some of the way that she's treated when she goes to that Thanksgiving dinner is her own fault. She's drunk. She acts in an inappropriate manner.
Right.
She could have probably kept a lower profile and gotten through it in
She's
one
nervous,
piece.
so you're right.
Secondly, the father at the head of the table there, and that scene goes on, she walks away from the table and he says, no, let her come back, she's still a person. It's kind of a satire there of the knee-jerk liberal mentality that I found very interesting. I think it's quite possible to have people of any ethnic group who in a movie like this can behave in any way without somebody saying that it's prejudice in some way.
Well, I'm saying that it is unrelentingly negative, and I think that what would be interesting, for example, I really don't want to give away the ending, but the movie...
Well, the ending is terrible.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to give that part away, I hated the ending of the movie.
And so is there any truth here? And that's what I thought is, you know what, there's no truth whatsoever in this whole film.
The movie goes on automatic pilot in the last 20 minutes. You could just take the last 20 minutes and just confront the people who made the movie and say, what were you thinking about? And the movie goes straight in the toilet.
And that's why I'm giving it a negative vote, and that is also why I think that the only thing that she offers him is good sex, and that's why the relationship wouldn't last.
Coming up next, the remake of the cult horror movie, Night of the Living Dead.
Give it up, Cooper! Just crawl back in your...
The zombies are on the attack again in Night of the Living Dead, and our next film is a remake of George Romero's classic 1968 black and white cult horror film. It was made on the cheap 22 years ago. The original movie, however, earned a lot of praise for its low-key, sometimes droll approach to horror, with convincing zombies who just kept on coming, slowly, tottering and steadily so. The new version, also written by Romero but directed by Tom Savini, is in color, but features many of the same elements. The zombies, slow on the attack, against a man and a woman who find themselves trapped in a farmhouse.
What's happening?
I don't know. Nobody knows.
The classic shots of the zombies here, staggering across the countryside, are a big feature in this remake. I just don't think they're as menacing, however, in color.
They're so slow.
We could just walk right past them. We wouldn't even have to run.
I think she's right. They conceivably could walk away, and that would be the end of the movie. Nevertheless, other potential victims congregate in the farmhouse, and there's naturally dissension led by a nervous father.
Said they were going to board it up. Board it up, please.
And you refused to help them.
That's right, Helen. I refused. Right, I refused. You know why? Because they're wrong, Helen. It's a stupid idea.
Nothing special there. There are a few plot twists from the original, but the overall spirit of the movie is the same, leaving the obvious question, why was this film made? And aside from monetary reasons, I can't think of a single good reason. In fact, if this has been the picture made in '68, it wouldn't have been a cult film.
Wouldn't have liked it then. No, this movie is so close to the original that it doesn't bring anything new to the party.
Correct.
And if you're going to look at a movie called Night of the Living Dead, you might as well look at the first one. It's a lot better. So that's it.
Nothing
Waste
more
of
to
time.
say.
It's kind of like Lord of the Flies. Why bother? It was a box office flop when it first came out, but 15 years later, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is the longest-running, most popular cult film in history. Now it's finally on home video, and we'll take a look at it when we come back. Rocky Horror Picture Show was first released in 1975. It got mostly bad reviews and did lousy business at the box office. But then, in the spring of '76, it was re-released in a series of Saturday midnight screenings that quickly mushroomed into a show business phenomenon. All over the world, Rocky Horror fans dressed up like their favorite characters and stood in line for hours to get into the midnight show and reenact the movie while it was playing on the screen. They knew the film by heart, and they brought all the props and costumes and one-liners they could possibly need to upstage it with their own weekly celebration.
It's just a jump to the left.
Rocky Horror, which is a send-up of classic horror films with a big dose of modern-day kinkiness, has been playing somewhere at midnight ever since 1976. This past weekend, for example, it played in over 100 American cities, and it's grossed more than $100 million at the box office. But it was never released on home video, maybe because the producers wanted fans to keep buying those tickets. This Halloween season, however, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is finally available on video cassette so that the home audience can check out the story of Dr. Frank-N-Furter, the transvestite from Transylvania.
Well, you got caught with a flat world. How about that? Well, babies, don't you panic. By the light of the night, it'll all seem all right. I'll get you a satanic mechanic.
Is this great comedy? Is this inspired music? No. But it has become ingrained in the memories of thousands of Rocky Horror fans until the quality of the material hardly matters. I think the basic idea isn't to watch Rocky Horror, but to interact with it. I went to the midnight screenings myself on a couple of occasions, and you could hardly see or hear the movie because of everything going on in the theater. Frankly, I think the home video version is going to be sort of a disappointment for a lot of people because without the sideshow in the theater, Rocky Horror turns out to be just what it was when it first came out in 1975, a fairly mediocre movie.
I liked some of the music when I first saw it, but it is nothing special on home video. I mean, I read an interview with a fan who said that he'd seen it over 100 times, and the people who see it on home video can't count those times.
Yeah.
And he's right, because I don't think that's the experience. It's in the theater and should be enjoyed there.
Coming up next, our selection of a good new movie to rent. This one features Nick Nolte in one of his best performances.
Just out on home video is the New York police story Q&A. Bad title, but a very good movie. Nick Nolte is superb as a racist cop who wants to shortcut justice because he's sick of street crime and drug dealers. Timothy Hutton is also very good as the fresh Irish assistant district attorney who fights a tired, old, corrupt system. Directed by Sidney Lumet, this movie documents the moral and physical decay of the big city. Q&A is an original thriller ignored first at the box office. You now have a second chance on home video. I recommend it highly. Now let's recap the movies we reviewed on this show. 2 thumbs up for Reversal of Fortune, the offbeat retelling of the Klaus von Bülow story with terrific performances by Jeremy Irons as von Bülow and Ron Silver as his lawyer. 2 downturn thumbs for the Australian Western Quigley Down Under. We both thought it was a silly story. Roger enjoyed the performances. A split vote on White Palace, the sexual drama with good performances by James Spader and Susan Sarandon. I thought the story was preposterous at times and full of cruel stereotypes. Roger enjoyed the movie's analysis of a nonconformist relationship, although he didn't care for the ending either. And 2 thumbs down for the pointless remake in color of The Night of the Living Dead. Skip this one and rent the original if you want to see good zombies. So the picture that we both recommend together, at least, is Reversal of Fortune.
And I think it has a good chance of getting an Academy Award nomination or 2, especially one for Jeremy Irons. Until recently, most of the silent movies available on video were faded and scratchy and not very easy to watch. It's like looking at a movie through a screen door. But recently, a whole treasure trove of great silent classics has been re-released on tape and disc in sparkling new prints from the original sources. Next week, we'll devote a special edition of Siskel and Ebert to rediscovering the most entertaining of the great silent films. That's next week, and until then, the balcony is closed.